Welcome, Aumit. I put together a quick little agenda here just so we could guide our conversation. I figure it makes sense for each of us to do a real quick intro and just give some background. Talk about the goals of our conversation, what we really want to try to achieve today, and then have you just restate in your own words like where you'd like some perspective. So I'm happy to start. I'm Chris. I've been in software for going on 20 years now professionally. I've held roles as an engineer, an architect, a tech lead, a manager, a director, a DevOps person across a bunch of different situations. So I've seen things from a lot of different perspectives. And my real motivation and excitement is to really look to give back to the next generation of software craftspeople and try to help bring them sort of up to speed a little bit faster.
Cool. Anthony, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yep. I'm Anthony. I've been in the software engineering world, I guess, going back into high school, where I was working for a video game company doing sound clips. But then over the last, I think it's been 11 or 12 years, I've moved around into small companies, startups, mid-size, even as big as Amazon. So I too have seen a fair amount. And I've dabbled in the front end, the back end, DevOps with the CI/CD work. I've even done some product design. So hopefully I can add some color here. That's the gist.
Cool. So I'm Aumit, and first and foremost, thank you guys for taking the time to speak with me. I think this is a really cool idea, and I'm really happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week. So a little bit about myself. I just started as a software engineer. I graduated college at the end of January, so I'm pretty fresh in the industry. In terms of being a part of software and like coding itself, I've been coding since I was like in elementary school, middle school. Mostly just started out like making these little cheeky HTML, CSS websites, doing a little JavaScript, jQuery stuff. But then moving on into high school, I got into some robotics stuff, and that's when I kind of started getting into like the computer science fundamentals and like understanding what programming actually is. And that's where I got really hooked, and I knew I wanted to do software as a career. So like throughout college, I did a bunch of internships. They were all at startups. My very first internship was at a super small startup. It was like 5 people. It was in New York City. I learned a lot. And that was actually even before I started college. So what I was trying to do was I took my fall semester off, my freshman fall, so I can get some industry experience, kind of understand the career that I was heading towards. And it was really valuable. I learned a lot. And then really ever since then, I've been an intern at Indigo Ag, where I work with Anthony now. So I was an intern there for 3 summers, and now I'm a full-time engineer.
Awesome.
And I've only been on the job for a couple months, so. Cool.
But you've held 3 internships there, so like no huge surprises, right?
Yeah, no. It's nice because people always say like, is it weird going back? It's never weird. It's always nice because it's the familiarity of like the people that I work with day to day. I've been lucky enough to basically, I'm still around the same people that I've like was on a team with while I was an intern, and get to talk and interact with the same people. It's also not, I think there's a big benefit to being somebody who's new to industry, like straight out of college, and going into a place where you have some background as an intern, because you're not as scared to like bring up questions or like ask things. Like you kind of understand how the org works, and you're not like, is this a dumb question? Like, should I ask this person that? Like you've kind of already made those mistakes as an intern, right? So as a full-time, you can just, go for it and like feel less blocked. So yeah, that's definitely been one of the cool things. And I get to work with Anthony, which is nice.
Yeah, I've done a couple different tours of duty with Anthony, and now I'm excited to be able to like to see what this adventure holds. So I hear
Exciting. You. Cool.
So did you want to talk about? Oh yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So really, what I hope this will be, and this is very, very transparently our first time doing this. So love your feedback after the fact. But I'd love for this to be a conversation, right? I did a little bit of research. I prepared a few notes just so that I sort of had a familiar background on the situation. But really, like, I'd love for you to start by just restating. Thank you for filling out that little survey. Restating in your own words, like, what problem you're looking for some perspective on, and then we could just have a conversation about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think this isn't necessarily a singular problem. I guess you can think of it more as like a class of problems, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a while, like even as an intern. Because a lot of what you do in industry is very different from what you would do in the classroom, right? And the key driving factor for that is there's a business you need to support. Whereas in the classroom, everything is pure theoretical. Well, there's practical aspects to it, but a lot of it is pure, like, write this code and it should pass these test cases, right, etc. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are on balancing, like, in an industry perspective where you're a business that needs to move fast and build products and design all these things and satisfy so many users. How do you balance the need to grow a business and build out all these products with the need to do good engineering work, right? Like documenting things and establishing kind of really strong and durable test infrastructure. So like the things that like you would categorize under the umbrella of good engineering, and like how do you balance that when you're making these decisions as like a team lead or like somebody that's like driving these like product factors like from the engineering side. So I'm curious what your perspectives are on that.
Yeah, and when I was thinking through this ahead of time, I sort of bucketed a lot of those aspects under this very vague heading of like sustainability. Right, you want to be able to provide sustainable software, not just, oh, I need to meet this deadline, so I need to crank this through, and it has a ton of bugs and it's got no test cases and it's terribly performant or performs terribly. Putting it under the idea of sustainability, I think, is interesting. Anthony, I don't know if you have any broad overarching thoughts that you want to share.
Yeah, well, one thing we could do is take this to the extremes and see, what does the world look like where we only ship features and, or we go to the other extreme and we only focus on sustainability and we can't provide value. So I don't know if we want to just start with one where what does it look like if we only ship features? I don't know. I think we can all say that we've worked on code that was built quickly, probably more quickly than we would like it to have been built.
Yeah.
And so there are some things that, like, regressions is the word that keeps coming to mind, where you're afraid to touch anything because you might break everything. And we invest no time in testing or even thinking about like tools that manage that for you. So linters are an example of a tool that manages that for you, but
yeah, and yeah. For the we only ship features case, like, I think you're focusing very much on the engineering side. Like, what does it mean for us as engineers? Like, I think we want to also ask, like, what does it mean for the customer, right? Because if you're afraid to go in and make a change, you're hesitant, right? That's likely going to be a bug for somebody. And when we're hesitant to make changes because we don't have good test infrastructure, it's going to take us longer to fix that bug because we'll need another change to actually fix the bug that we caused from the 0th change. So I think it's interesting to like just keep asking, and what about the customer, right? Like, I think linting is an interesting example, right? So we want all our code to be formatted the same, so that it's really so that we as engineers don't spend time arguing about how the code should be formatted, right? Because at the end of the day, it compiles or interprets exactly the same, whether there's a new line or not. But when we can make that automatic, and we can not have that conversation about whether or not there should be a line break, then it can actually just be a faster process.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's also like at least I have been thinking about this as, if an engineer has to go back and fix a bug, that actually probably affects other engineers. At a minimum, you have people who have to look at your code review, right? So now you're disrupting another person because you decided to ship something quickly that wasn't quite right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that we're never in sort of, or it's rare that we're in a complete silo as engineers, right? We're always working with somebody, whether it's a product manager or a project manager or an internal stakeholder or a customer proxy, right? And we build software to meet the needs of the customer and the business, not because, we all are in software because at some point we like writing software and we like solving hard technical problems, but that's not why they pay us for it, right? When we think about who we're interacting with, I think it makes sense for there to be a healthy tension between like the desire of having this sustainable software from the engineering org and the desire to ship valuable features to customers quickly from the product organization, because that keeps you from going to like one complete extreme or the other, which are the degenerate cases that you alluded to, Anthony.
Yeah,
we could go the other route and never ship a feature ever and have 100% test coverage.
Yeah, and then you don't have the business.
and so like half joking, like what happens if we decided that was our policy? We're an engineering team, and okay, we're just going to work on code quality, or let's just be broader and say sustainability for the next 3 months. That's it. What is the impact there?
Well, it seems like for those 3 months, like you're not moving the needle in terms of the business and what the business really needs, right? And like in terms of at least the businesses that I've been a part of, like 3 months is a long time, like a lot of time to not be delivering any value. Because if you break it up into quarters, that's an entire quarter, and then at that point, it's like it would definitely have a lot of negative impacts. You wouldn't really have the funds to support a job at that point, to support people to do that work, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Right. But business is very much a what have you done for me lately game, right?
Yeah.
When the next time the budgeting conversation comes around, like that team probably isn't getting more funding or even necessarily maintaining its funding, right?
Right. Cool. Yeah. So to summarize that, it kind of seems to me like there's it's always going to be a trade-off, and whatever trade-offs you make, it's debt in either direction, right? So if you're focusing more on the engineering, it's debt on the business side. If you're focusing more on the business side, it's technical debt, and it's whatever you can end up paying down easier or more cheaply later on, I think makes more sense. That was those are some really really strong analogies. That was I hadn't thought about it that way, especially thinking about it in terms of the extremes. Anthony, that was actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and if I can figure out how to use the Skype chat. So disclaimer, I work for HubSpot, but all of these opinions are my own personal opinions. I shared an article that you can read later on. This is how HubSpot thinks about building sustainable software.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually have a bunch of separate categories of what sustainability means, and it's built like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to start from the bottom and you can't move up until you've gotten good enough at that level. So it's security and privacy, reliability, performance, usability, and then it gets into the real value and growth, which are the customer business needs things. So if I look at HubSpot, it's very much a startup and now a scale up, And in the beginning, I'm sure I wasn't there in the beginning, but I'm sure they had to make fast decisions to get to market, to beat their competitors, to solve the needs of their customers. And now as they grow and evolve, it's much more about maintaining this sustainability. So I think one thing that's interesting is, if we recognize that we have some counterpart in the organization that's responsible more for the business than for the pure engineering side. It's like, okay, well, what if we come up with a set of guidelines for what does it mean to build a sustainable feature, right? So you mentioned things like documentation. Now, in my experience, the amount of time that you spend writing documentation compared to the time you spend delivering the feature, like, it's very small, right? And it's almost negligible because software estimation is really, really tricky. So if you can get that stuff out of the way and be transparent about it up front, it's like, okay, here are the requirements for us to deliver a feature. Here's what a good sustainable feature looks like. And, that can be iterative for sure. And I do think that there are places where you want to hold a much stronger line, like with security, right? Like, this has the potential to leak customer data. Like, no, we're not doing that. Right. Versus performance. Well, like, this is just slightly over SLA. Let's ship it because we're only going to put it into a private beta and it's not going to have a ton of usage. And like, we'll prioritize the performance work like the next go round when we touch this area of the code. Mm-hmm. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, for sure. Cool.
Yeah. So something, Chris, that you said to me a long time ago was that the source of most conflict is mismatched expectations. So if you can have a process that includes product and your customers and the engineers, which builds in all of the sustainability requirements as part of the process, then there are no mismatched expectations.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I like that. That's a really nice way to summarize that, I think, and like formalize it.
Yeah, and look, it needs to be as formal as it needs to be, right? Like, if it's a team of 3 folks and it's a small startup, like, just have a README that says here's the expectations and pull request into that. It doesn't need to be a capital F framework where there's all sorts of feedback signals and loops. It can just be a checklist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool.
What in practice? So bringing this back to your industry experience, like, when have you seen this go well, or when have you seen this go poorly?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen it go poorly per se. I think I would say it just didn't go as expected. So like, coming from like the academic side, right? Like, as a student, like, any code you write, it's to like get a passing grade, and to get a passing grade, it's like you have to do X, Y, Z, right? But like in industry, it's like, from the business perspective, what you really want is like code that works, right? On an engineering side, like, works is defined differently, but from different people's perspectives. And usually, like, works, like, you'll have testing infrastructure to test it. It means like updating the code isn't super hard and annoying. It's well documented. It's self-documented to a certain extent. So like, in terms of industry experience, like, I don't think I've seen it gone poorly. It's always interesting to me, like, when I, like, in the projects that I'm working on now, like, I have to make that decision myself. It's always interesting that it's just such a different experience. And I think it's something that a lot of students, like, coming out as new grad engineers, coming out of school, it's something that they'll experience too, is just confronting that trade-off that you have to make sometimes. Like, do I document this fully? And I think there are like some common tropes where, like, you look at the code that like an intern or like a new engineer writes, compared to like a code that like a senior would write, and like you see like the difference is really the comments and like just like how it's broken down, and like over time the comments kind of devolve back into just like one liner, like very simple, which is really I think I'm getting to the point now where like it kind of makes sense. Like it needs to be as verbose as it should be, right? Like as long as it gets the point across. Like I'm personally a fan of code that self-documents either like through good variable names or just good structure. But yeah, it's something that I think you just improve by looking at and working on more code. But yeah, to like answer your question, I don't think I've seen it gone poorly. I think it's just an interesting thing that I observe, and I'm like still curious, like for people that are in more senior positions. I mean, you two are obviously have much more experience than me and are more distinguished in engineering. But like, it's always just interesting in me to like to get that perspective, like from looking at a code base and looking at requirements and looking at kind of what's expected of you, like from a business. As an engineer, does your perspective on those trade-offs like really change over time, like with more experience or like the more experience that you gain? So it's interesting for me to like kind of get your perspectives on it, especially with like my perspective, like my personal biases that I have. So it is cool to see, for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking of whether perspectives have really changed. I think for me, what's changed is the blind spots, right? Like actually knowing, having an intuition, let's say, for when a performance thing will matter and when a performance thing won't.
Yeah.
Right. Because like they say, premature optimization is the root of all evil.
Right.
And like that's a kind of token example, but I think there's some meat there. Anthony, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not really sure I have too much to add there. I'm not sure. I guess maybe there's a way. Like the piece I'm struggling with here is exactly the question that you're asking. So I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. So maybe that would be helpful if you could ask it slightly differently.
Yeah, I think like what I was mainly trying to get at is like has your perspective on like these trade-offs that you make between like what product and a business wants and like what you want to do like as an engineer in terms of like writing good code and writing tests and like all these things. Like I guess your perspective on those trade-offs, like has that changed from when you were like a junior engineer to where you are now? And like how has that evolved?
Got it. So I think I hope I'm a lot less arrogant now. So like oftentimes there are many ways to solve the same problem. And so unless you really feel strongly about something, I don't know that I need to push back anymore. So if like this is what Chris was saying earlier, where you have to have a line on certain things that you're not willing to budge on, and every once in a while you'll find that in yourself. You're like, oh, well, this is that line. I didn't know that was there. But I'm a lot more, I guess, tolerant to just maybe this isn't the right way to say it, but the whims of the business.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I can talk to like a couple of times where I haven't had the tension or a counterpart in the business. So I can think of two specific roles where I was, in agile terms, I was the scrum master and the product owner. And so like you're trying to represent both sides, and that's way harder because you're sitting there arguing with yourself in your head. And as an engineer, right? Like I really think of myself as an engineer. I just want to say yes and build things and make customers happy, right? But you got to be able to know where to draw those lines.
And I've also been guilty of being the person who thinks that, oh, you can just squeeze this in. It's small, and it's never small. then burnout happens, and so it's better to have a stance and not try and and be, again, the mismatched expectations things, like, here's what we can do given the time that you're giving me.
Cool.
Yeah, thinking about, we talked a little bit about formalizing the expectations in some way. I think I've seen a lot of cases where you can get a ton of leverage just by automating those things. So like the work it would take to ensure that you have at least one test for every class, right? Like that's a relatively low bar in terms of and you can turn that dial up and down however you want to.
Right.
But getting that in early in the process, like, really reinforces, like, no, this is a required piece that we need to deliver. And that needs to be negotiated potentially ahead of time with the product or project management counterpart. But then once you set that expectation and you have automation enforce it, like, now it just becomes the way we work, and it builds in that sustainability. So looking for systematic and automatable ways to build in that sustainability, I think that's a key piece that I wish I had learned earlier.
Yeah, I would say something that I did as when I was doing the lead work was always to get all of the pieces connected and worry about, like, coverage later. So it was like, put the testing framework in place, put the documentation framework in place, and it can do nothing. But at least when you want to point somebody to it, you can say, like, here's all the plumbing, and then just it needs to be filled in.
Right.
Yeah, I've experienced a lot of the same with testing. It's like, okay, there's a bug in production. It is a very different feeling from, I have to now spin up a unit test project and get it configured and get it to start running, from, I just need to add a test for this case. And then it'll make sure we never trip over it again. Getting it into the structure.
Right, because that cost is going to have to be paid at some point, right? It's better to pay it off early, it seems.
I mean, so going back to Anthony's original question, what if we never wrote tests? Like if we said no unit tests, or no testing, period. Like, all testing has to be manually done by the engineer. Like, you're just gonna, your number of regressions is just gonna go up and up and up and up because it's whack-a-mole.
Or the people you hire on Mechanical Turk is going to go up.
That'd be crazy if you can do that and get them to run your test cases.
One test case per Turker.
Are they called Turkers?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I would assume.
That's great.
Yeah. If we have some time, I actually had kind of a separate question. It's not super related to this topic. So one thing that I've kind of run into, as an intern and now working full time, is I find the hardest thing for me when I start on a project is literally the beginning. It's it's a new code base. There are different people working on it, people that I might not know. So I'm curious, as people that have worked on many projects, what advice you would have, I guess backing up a little bit, when you approach a project, a new project, either greenfield or something that already exists, what's kind of your first instinct, and what are do you have tips on how to make the process of picking something new up go smoother?
Sure, I can start with this, having recently done this. Usually I start by asking the people who are really, really busy, what I can do to take something off their plate. And then they're incentivized to help me. So you're adding value to them. You also get to, you'll have hopefully they'll give you a task that's reasonable given that you don't know the code base. That's sort of implied in what I'm saying, but and then you don't feel so bad asking them for help.
Yeah, I like that. Build social capital with the people that you're working with. That's a really neat way to think about that. Yeah.
That's the exact phrase that I was thinking was capital. For me, I think I know different people have different learning styles. So one thing that I try to be very clear about when I'm, let's say I need to add a feature to some code base that's owned by a different team, getting very, very clear about the requirements and the end state and the metrics before I start. Before I like open up the box, it's like, okay, here's this thing, and at the end of this, I want this thing to do this plus some, plus 5% efficiency or output or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know that I am a just-in-time learner. So if an app if a command line application has 52 command line options, like I only need to know about the one that I need to know about, and then like the rest I can save for later.
Mm-hmm.
But I do sometimes like to dig a little deeper. So I actually have like two queues. So like what I need to learn right now, and then like a bookmark for I want to read more about this later, because it's easy to go like deep, and you'll just you can pull on any software stack, like it's just layers, and
Right.
you can just keep going for forever. So like knowing when to like cut it off and say, okay, I've learned enough about this section that I can proceed with the goal, but like there's more to learn there, and I should go back and take that on when there's less time pressure, or when I want to fit it into my personal development time. The other thing is, look, at the end of the day, this stuff is all just code. Like if there's no documentation, like read it and write your own documentation to try, like read the code and write your own documentation, even in a Scratch file or a notepad or whatever, that says like, okay, here's what I know about the system, and just start building your system vision by interacting with the system, whether that's by running it or reading the code. Like at the end of the day, these things were all built by human beings, and like it's just a computer doing exactly what we told it to. So just like looking for self-service resources, and if they don't exist, within reasonable time bounds, creating some for yourself, I think are valuable approaches.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Cool.
there's also like one thing that's really nice about what I think modern software development looks like is we have pull requests, so people can tell you if you're crazy. So you just take a stab at it and say, this is how I think it's supposed to work, and then the people who are experts in that code base will tell you if you're right, or if you're close, or if you're way off base.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, and the history of pull requests is actually like an artifact as well, right? Like there may be pull requests related to the feature that you're working on or thinking about, and like just looking at the comments that those PRs got, like what are people nitpicky about in this code base, without having to go and explicitly ask someone. Like you can come up with a much more polished first draft by doing a little digging on your own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I can tell you like how I kind of approach this.
Please.
So the way I think about it is when I'm approaching a new problem, or I guess this makes more sense for like a project that already exists. The first thing I think is like it's kind of a perfect information game. Like everything I need to know about this project, like all the information is in the repo for the most part. Like there are things that are probably like in the engineers' brains that like you'll have to tease out by like building up that social capital and like not feeling bad about like asking questions that are like kind of one-sided sometimes. But yeah, I guess that's kind of how I approach like a repo that already exists, or like a project that already exists that I'm like jumping in on, is that like if there are features being shipped for it, like while I'm concurrently working on it, there are people that are solving problems beside me. So it's like I can probably benefit from like looking at those PRs, even if it's not directly applicable to like what I'm doing. And like I probably I mean, unless it's like some like very like general programming thing and not something that's like very specific to the project itself, like some type of business logic that I wouldn't be aware of. I probably wouldn't be able to give like a thorough review of those PRs, but there's still a lot of value in looking at them. Um, but yeah, I kind of look at the entire project and the team working on the project as a resource in and of itself. So like the people, obviously there are opportunities to build social capital with them by doing various things, like helping them with certain things, and then like you can like get those favors back in some way. But it's also like everyone's a team, everyone's there to help each other, obviously. But it's also just like looking at the code, like all the answers are there for the most part. A lot of it's just taking the time to make sense of it, and I found that's been super useful for me. It's just you know this code base. There might be like idioms and like other like there might be neat and clever tricks that might be confusing like on a first glance, but like after a little while, like it will make sense. So yeah, that's kind of how I've approached that. Um, so yeah, I really liked, Anthony, how you kind of summarized like using or like being able to like kind of consult the people on the team or the people that are familiar with the code base and kind of using them as a resource. I think a lot of times, uh, especially for like new grad engineers or like people that are doing internships or like internships later on in their college career, you kind of don't have that full experience of working with other engineers or like working with other people. Like in college, you might have projects where you work on teams, but a lot of like academia doesn't really work that way, right? It's a lot of like everybody gets their own individual grade, and like industry is fundamentally very different from that, right? Like the whole team succeeds or nobody succeeds, like because you're all shipping the same product. So I think that's like another one of those like personal philosophy paradigm shifts that kind of happen, and something that like I'm kind of like getting used to. And I also think it really comes down to like personality. I think some people um, like just put them in a corner and let them like read the code on their own and they'll get it. I'm not one of those people. I like to like obviously look at the code and I like to have my time where I just like put my head down and have my hands on the keyboard. But I also just really enjoy, like talking to the other engineers, and just in general. And one of the reasons why like just this conversation in general is really valuable to me is I'm somebody who values mentorship. So like being able to like as an intern, I can remember countless times, uh, just like being able to sit with somebody that's like a senior engineer or somebody that has more experience and just watching them work sometimes. Like you learn like so many little things that just make you go a lot faster, and it might not be like a useful tip for just like a single like project that I'm working on, but it's something that's gonna pay dividends hundreds of times like after that. Just like little things like that. But yeah, so that's definitely, I mean, that's like a little bit of me rambling on, but that's kind of like how I view like working on like a new project and like trying to take advantage of everything that you have available to you.
Yep. And if oh, I got the little one at the door. Cadence, I need a minute, please. Um, if you are fortunate enough to be paired up with a team lead who is invested in the team, like it's in their best interest to make sure they do spend the time with you.
Right.
So it's good for you to ask so that you can be productive, so that you can also take things off of their plate. Like everybody wins in this scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And one technique that I've seen, and I would say it's probably out of the more like the most junior folks, is like batching. So like you go heads down and you dig into the code and then come up with your list of questions that you want to talk through rather than like doing a onesie twosies like, hey, so making it more into a support session maybe. That can be helpful, and just that's more being conscious of the time that you're asking of people. Consider it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Ahmed, I think we talked about this a while back, but you want to come with solutions,
Yeah. Yeah.
and ask them, to vet those solutions. But then you've at least shown you've thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like a good perspective for uh, like new grads or people doing internships like later in the college career is that you kind of it's very easy to just ask questions, right? Just like, I don't know this. I want to like this person probably knows it. Let me just ask them, right? That's not really useful, and I don't think you build empathy and an understanding of why that's not useful until you have people doing the same to you. And like it's just not productive. It's not productive for everyone, right? And like when you're in college, you don't get that experience really for the most part, right? Like you might work on teams for certain programming projects, but it's never like you're generally with people that have the same level of experience as you, and that's just how academia works, right? You're not with somebody that's like a senior like software engineer or like an architect or something, right? Like in college. So yeah, it's definitely something that might be a perspective that like you might not have unless you've like worked with like some pretty exceptional people and like kind of come to understand just like being a sponge and like understanding it, like how they kind of respond to questions and like kind of what makes sense of like what makes the most sense to ask them, right? Like you can ask very trivial questions that you can probably answer on your own, and then afterwards you might feel like, yeah, I could have figured that out on my own, like that it's kind of a dumb question. So like yeah, I think that kind of bleeds into like the question of like so when is it okay to like ask questions, right, of like your team lead or like people that are like more senior than you, and like my perspective on that, like as in from and this is kind of a perspective that I built as an intern, and like have brought with me as now like a full-time engineer, is like what Anthony was saying essentially. It's like try to solve the problem on your own, try to solve it in a few different ways, and a lot of times you'll find that you will probably end up solving it on your own anyway when you do that. But then you kind of look at it from the perspective of, so you bring these problems to whoever you want these answers from, and then you think about it from their perspective, right? Like this person's coming to you, and you can tell they were really thoughtful about the work and like kind of the different approaches they thought about. And one, like it'll help you get to a solution a lot faster because like you've considered a lot more use cases and a lot more of like the edge cases that might have come up already. So it's a shorter list of things to consider. And two, it's just again like kind of going back to like the idea of like building social capital with your team. It kind of shows, it lets you, you're somebody that like puts their head down and like actually tries to figure things out, right? As opposed to just like asking questions all the time. Not that asking questions is a bad thing, but like more so like asking the right questions, I think, and at the right times is more valuable, not just for yourself, but also for like the people around you.
And let's be real, I'm just going to Google it anyway, so you're just going to Google faster than me.
Yeah, exactly. You might as well not even ask. And you can just Google. There's that link, like let me Google that for you or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that link.
I built a version a long time ago that was let Anthony Google that for me, and paid a lot of dividends. Built very sustainably. I think there is like a small caveat. So overall, love that approach. Like I think it has a lot of good flavors to it. I think the exception is when you're truly stuck. Like if you're just staring at it and ready to just give up and bang your head against the desk, like it's okay to ask for help, and just come and say like, I'm struggling here. I do it all the time. Hey, I've been looking at this for 45 minutes and I haven't made any progress. Could you just give me another pair of eyes on this? Because getting an alternate perspective can be really helpful when you're in that mode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you have a stand-up or something similar where you can escalate if you need to, or even like tease that you might ask for help and ask them when it would be a good time, or is tomorrow better, or something like that, and give them an opportunity to just fit their schedule in, I guess.
Yeah, I'm somebody that gets a lot of value from like talking problems out and like thinking about them with people. So like for me, and people have asked me like what's it like going from it's like I interned with the same company for 3 years and then came back as a full time. Like, kind of what's the transition like? And like for me, the answer has always been like, for at least for the past couple months that I've been a full time since April, is like it's kind of like I'm a kid in a candy store now. Because like I've always like really enjoyed like programming and like working on hard problems, and now I get to do that full time with really smart people that like to do the same thing. Because like when you're in college, it's like you major in whatever you major in, and then you have time to work on like computer science problems or like programming projects or like whatever it is, open source, like whatever it is you want to work on. But you have to make like it's not like your main thing. So it's like it's always like you have to stay up late and like make time for that, right? Like it's after homework, it's after exams, it's after all these things, after activities. But like now, I don't know. It's just been really exciting to like actually like work on these things and like, like sometimes you get stuck, like as you guys said, and it's like you just want to like bang it against the keyboard. But I don't know. I've enjoyed it a lot of just like being able to like talk about problems and like think about them and like work on new things. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like transitioning like from college where like programming is a passion but not a profession yet, to now where it's both. I think has been kind of really, I guess, like the defining change, like characteristic of change. Like now, like as somebody who's like a new grad engineer.
Yeah, it sounds like you're thinking about the problems in a real sane way to me. So I'm excited for you to really get into your career.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Did you say something?
Yeah, I'm just I wanted to know it's been about 45 minutes. I didn't know if we wanted to do anything else or wrap up. I have at least the hour blocked out, so.
Yeah, so Aumit, I'm really like selfishly interested to know like where didn't you find value in that conversation? So this is a little meta feedback for us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the whole thing was valuable, honestly. I think this will vary depending on like the type of people that you bring on here, like just like as a personality thing. Because like I'm somebody like I get a lot out of like hearing you guys speak, but also from like I get a lot of value also responding and like thinking about like that stuff and like having a dialogue with those things. But some people would get a lot of value from just asking questions and just being a sponge and listening as well. So like I don't know. I guess like if there's a way to like gauge that beforehand, like kind of like what do you I don't even know how you would like gather that feedback, honestly. Like I just know like as who I am and like how I like take like mentorship situations, like that's like the value that I get out of it. And I guess to a certain extent, like it's really the mentee's job to like drive that part of it, right? Like if you're somebody that gets value out of just like being prepared and asking your questions and then just like listening to what the other person has to say, then like you should do that and then just like let them talk the whole time. But like I don't know, like I guess as you guys probably saw, like I get a lot of value from listening to you guys, but then also like internalizing it, thinking about it, and then trying to like summarize or like like give my own take and like my own philosophy and kind of refine my own ideas in that way. So I guess it's really going to be like the cadence of the conversation, I think, would shift depending on like who you guys have on, if that makes sense. I don't know. I don't know if I explained that well. Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, like I think the whole thing was super valuable. And any opportunity that I get to like talk to people that like do the work that I want to do, and like obviously like are as experienced as you guys are. Like I was Anthony's intern 2 summers ago, and I have the pleasure of working with him now. So like it's always valuable for me to like get to talk to people that are like really like doing the work that I want to be doing someday. So yeah, honestly, like it's also just like the most what to you guys might seem like really like a really like mundane comment or like a really like small suggestion for someone like me or like someone that's more junior that you guys might have on here, it like it can be like a new perspective for them or like something that they hadn't thought of. So it's like super valuable. So like even if you think like something sounds kind of dumb or like it might be obvious, like it's not going to be obvious like to the person that's like younger and like doesn't really like understand a lot of the things that you guys have understood like, over the course of your careers. So like, yeah, like honestly, like I guess to summarize that, just like say whatever you want, like all of, yeah, like be a fire hose, and like because like a lot of it is going to be valuable, especially when talking to like younger people, I think.
You haven't listened to the garbage that comes out of my mouth then.
You're the exception, Anthony.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, this was honestly like super exciting for me and very like I feel really engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate your thoughtful approach and your thoughtful questions, and I'll encourage you like, and I know you work with Anthony, but like keep us posted on how things are going. I'd love to talk to you again in 6 months or whatever, and see what new exciting things are in store for you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for taking the time, and like I think this is a great idea. It's always like I said, mentorship is something that's super valuable to me. So it's always great to see people that kind of value that as well. So for sure.
Sweet.